Welcome, everybody, to the CC Show. My name is DJ Seith. Thank you guys for tuning in today. We got a special show for you. Special guest Janette Wallace, Becky Rowe, and Storm Hogan. Yeah! Workplace, and what do we do about racism when we find it in our workplaces? What do we do? Well, we're going to find out today on the show.
Spangled in countrysides and physical channels. Side of home fries, bacon thick and ample. Taking a handful of forks by the handle. Toiled in, but far from hard boiled soil, rich with nutrients and vegetable oil. Spoiled? Maybe. Definitely lucky. Sprinkled a little salt and pepper to make it into something. Feel like Benny, but I got a jet. Coffee, cigarettes, synthetic energy in check yet. Back to the music, yo, I'm breaking a sweat. Making the kind of tunes you want to take and play on cassette. I got the feeling when it's over, whether it's easy or hard, I'm better to squeeze the lemon than to shatter the shards. And it's cool, I'm good, whatever. You know it won't last forever. Listen, and you feel the thud.
Spinning around the globe on tour, rocking shows, seeing places I ain't never been or ever thought I'd go. Meeting all types of cats, traveling the path, plus cash flowing in, so I'm getting good at math. Sampling cuisine like a sampling machine. The van's packed up like a can of sardines. But when I hop out, I'm making plans with a queen who got a master's degree in the ass of my dreams. Guess it's safe to say I'm on a pretty good run. Kicked a few bad habits, snagged a couple good ones. It's all about the exchange, sharing the damn load. Cycle of the rain in the air so the plants grow. Now the whole clique shining like a flashlight. My pad is the lab, so I'm living that pad life. Hit 'em with the rhythm and it's on with the show. You already know that we all systems go.
Once again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in on a beautiful Saturday morning. Hope you guys are doing really good today. Introduce the Voices for Change panel today. Thank you so much for everybody to be here today. And to my left is our host Cece. And Cece, let's introduce everybody.
Hello. Today is August 22nd, 2020. And we are here on the CC Show featuring sounds by DJ Seith. Thank you all for coming. Yes, today we have Janette Wallace, Becky Rowe, and Skylee-Storm Hogan to talk about the racist workplace, Racist Coworkers 101. This is a hot topic that definitely needs to be unpacked, so we're here to do it today. Thank you, Seith, for those tunes on the way in. I was definitely vibing. Before we start, as usual, I just like to do a quick land acknowledgement. It's always important to take that time to recognize the land and the people. I'm coming from Boating, downtown Boating, or Sault Ste. Marie. So we're right in the middle of the Great Lakes, and as I often mention, it's a very important responsibility to the land and the waters here. We're the home of the former Shingwak Residential School. That was, is such a huge part of our history here in Sault Ste. Marie that we don't often, I guess, talk about. So I just wanted to recognize that, very important. We are surrounded by Garden River First Nations, Batchewana First Nation, as well as Missinaba Cree. We are home to the Anishinaabe people, as well as the Cree people, as well as folks from all around, because we are known as a place of gathering. So welcome to all people to Boating, and I hope it can be a friendly city. That's what we're working towards. So yeah, just wanted to acknowledge the land and the peoples and the truth and the history, because it's very, very important. So Ani Jibwejigan Indishnakwaz Makwadodam. As I mentioned, I'm from downtown Sault Ste. Marie. And I will let our guests introduce themselves. Seith, is there anything you want to throw in?
Yeah, actually, thank you very much for having me on the show today. My name is DJ Seith, yes, also from Boating territory, Sault Ste. Marie, also downtown as well. And I guess I just wanted to kind of maybe start off my contribution to the show by a little observation that I made today that it filled me with so much joy, and I wanted to spread that joy to everybody else that's watching today. So, driving home from work today, I was at an intersection, and as you know, anybody that's from Sault Ste. Marie, there's lots of traffic, or not traffic, what do you call it? Construction, I guess, right? So there were some traffic cones on the side of the road, and there was this little guy that was walking across the road as I was waiting at the red light. He had a little crab apple in his hand, and he went and he placed it right on top of one of the traffic cones, and then just walked away. And I thought that was just so beautiful. Just right on top of the traffic cone, made himself a little tree. I was like, yeah, I definitely have to share that on the show today. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Awesome. Well, kudos to that little guy and his little crab apple. It's crab apple season here, and they're falling, so pick them up before they fall.
Exactly.
I just wanted to give the guests, the Voices for Change panelists, a chance to introduce themselves. So I will throw the ball to Janet, and when you're done introducing yourself, and take as much space as you need, please throw the ball to whomever you think should go next.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Janette Wallace. I am, I guess, a young immigrant that moved to Sault Ste. Marie about 11 years ago. I'm not as young as I was when I first came here. But since I've come here, I've had lots of experience working in different industries within Sault Ste. Marie. And currently I manage the student union at Oklahoma University. And we are an activism and advocacy-based nonprofit organization. It's run for students, by students, but we also do a lot of community development work as well. Aside from that, I also am a co-organizer of the Black Lives Matter movement in Sault Ste. Marie. And I am definitely an advocate for food security and environmentalism projects. So.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your contributions and also just your dedication to the community and the work that you're doing. So thank you for that. And I guess I will symbolically for you throw the ball to Becky.
Hi, everyone. I'm Becky. First of all, I just wanted to say thanks for having me on. I've actually seen UCC speak at a Coldest Night of the Year walk, and I thought you were great. Janette, I saw you at some Acano events, and amazing. And Skylee-Storm, I saw you on this podcast a couple times, so it's just very nice to be among such strong individuals, and I'm very proud to be a guest here. I am a lawyer in Sault Ste. Marie. I moved back a couple years ago, My family lives here, so that was the big draw. And I'm actually just practicing in private practice right now at a local firm. And that's pretty much all I have to share about me right now. And I'll pass it to Skylee-Storm.
Can't hear you, Skylee.
I'm actually on mute. I'm good. That's like the new COVID thing now, isn't it? It's like, you're on mute. So I'm Skylee-Storm Sego. I'm coming at you from Ottawa, Ontario, downtown, on the traditional lands of the Algonquin, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee. I am Ganeaganaga Haudenosaunee from Ganawage First Nation, just south of Montreal. My mother is a settler. Her family came from Ireland to Newfoundland quite a long time ago. But yeah, that's kind of my positionality. I spent 4 years in Sault Ste. Marie doing my undergrad in law and justice, and I came to London, Ontario to do my master's degree in history, and I'm now a practicing historian in Ottawa, and I work full-time as a researcher at a consulting firm, and I work part-time with the Young Leader Circle as the networking lead, and I work really closely with some really awesome folks, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation.
Amazing. Yeah, even though I'm not physically in the room with you in our the space that we're holding right now, I just feel like there's so much power and energy. So I am so appreciative. So yeah, the racist workplace, racist coworkers 101. So I guess we just kind of wanted to go over how can we combat this racism in the workplace. And we had some notes just talking about like, you know, direct racism and indirect racism and that kind of thing. How are you folks like experiencing that in your day-to-day lives or in your workplaces? Feel free to jump in. I can start.
Well, I guess I can go ahead. I think now that we live in 2020, racism has become a little bit more subtle for the most part. It's not as aggressive as I think that it would have been years ago. And I find from my experience, a lot of times somebody doesn't realize that they're being racist, or they realize but sort of do not want to take that accountability for it. And there's a lot of sort of pushing the blame. I said this, or I did this because of this happened, or I've had a negative experience, or I simply didn't know is usually the excuses that I find a lot of times. I find just being sort of like a young woman and working in the academic sector, a lot of times I'm dealing with a lot of higher up executives. And so there would be a lot of sort of like, I guess, microaggressions, but I don't know if it's intended or not. And it would be like a lot, this example I like to use a lot is, well, we'll just leave this to the experts. And I think sometimes it could be maybe because of the color of my skin, or because I'm young, or because I'm a woman or whatever. And I'm always trying to sort of figure out the logic behind that and where these microaggressions are stemming from. And I guess maybe it's because of my role, and sort of like when you work in an academic sector, and especially like leading a student union, people tend to think that I'm a lot younger than I am. And I don't have that experience, likely because I'm still a student myself. So I'm in my third year undergraduate degree in environmental science. But on top of that, I feel that I am a mature individual first. So I am a mother of a 10-year-old. I hold 2 jobs. Like I said, I've worked lots of places, and I only enrolled because I think that I'm at that point in my life where I would just kind of like to take the other step. But I think when I'm in a meeting room with, like I said, those executive or those senior roles, they just kind of perceive me as, well, she's a student, she's managing students, she doesn't know what she's talking about. And I'm not sure why it's so hard to ask questions, or maybe sort of kind of get to know your coworkers or your peers that you're working with. But I find that rather than somebody being aggressive, using like maybe obscene language or something like that, you'll just find kind of the underlying little comments here and there. So
I get that too. Or sometimes folks like maybe they truly don't know, but like a lot of that I get in my work is like the question, do you smudge? So it's like somehow I'm like a shaman, or I'm like the exorcist, or I'm able to like voodoo rid you of all of your demons in your house, and I know some kind of magical like spells to do so or something, like because I smudge. So like I get that a lot. And I'm sure folks mean well, like they just want me to, to come and help a client or to like help cleanse like a space, but it's just like the tone in which they do it, or like they don't realize that they're tokenizing you. And like I have a long way to go on my spiritual journey. I've only been to a handful of like ceremonies, and I'm like just discovering who I am as an Indigenous person. But like a lot of the time in my like white professional circles, I'll be looked at as like a figurehead to like Indigenism or something. And so like I often get that like, do you smudge? And it's, it can go further than that. I don't mind, like a lot of the time I'll just refer people, like so that they can like learn that they're not going to perhaps the proper person. Like, oh, I know a really amazing elder, who might want to work with you, or let me ask, some of my resources in the community, or, I'm on the board at the Indian Friendship Center. Let me see what they have going down there to educate you in this, right? So like a lot of the time it is exhausting, but I'll educate or refer people in the right direction. But to go and take on that energy, like if I were to smudge everybody's house who asked me to smudge, like that'd be a lot of energy, right? Not only am I like not the person for that and not some kind of like guru, but also like that's like a lot to take into like my own personal space. So I guess that's an example of like that I felt in like a gentle, covert way. Like I don't know that people are necessarily trying to be racist or harmful, but they're definitely being like tokenizing in that way.
Yeah, I myself, I don't personally experience a lot of racism directed towards me at the workplace, but I do experience a lot of racism directed towards others in the workplace. And I find that oftentimes, I think maybe because people see the color of my skin and they think, oh, well, it's okay to say these things. But, that's one of the things that I was coming into this episode thinking is like, how do you deal with that? When you're not necessarily the target of the racism, but you're seeing it happening, and you're seeing these mindsets and this kind of like institutionalized, ugliness coming up towards people that aren't even in the same room. I work in a technical field. I work as an IT technician when I'm not DJing, and oftentimes people will hear me on the phone like, "Oh, I'm so glad I have you. You're not like from East India or something like that." And I was like, "Well, that's a microaggression right there. Like you need to manage that. You need to understand that the people that are working in that field are just as valid at that job as I am, and they're just as capable at that job as I am. And you kind of have to exercise a little bit more compassion. It's really hard to have that conversation. I apologize. I'm getting a doorbell right now. I don't know if you can hear that. Yeah, it's really hard to hear that, and just different things like that, in the IT field. And and kind of one of the things I was thinking about is like, how do you handle that? How do you handle that when you're in a place where somebody's asking you to do a job for them, but then they're also being racist? Like, do you call them out on it? Do you say, hey, I'm not gonna, you need to look at this? Like, how do you call them in? I don't know. It's a tough thing.
I have had the issue as well, mainly because I'm not visibly Indigenous. So I have a lot of people like disclose things to me that they ordinarily wouldn't disclose to a person of color. So when I was working in retail, which I did during my undergrad for a very long, like throughout the entire thing to basically support myself, I was asked to follow Indigenous people. Not because they were doing anything suspicious, but purely because they were Indigenous, and more than likely they thought that they were going to steal something. And, I kind of have this friendly, nice demeanor. But oftentimes when these things would happen at work, that demeanor would change and management would get pretty nasty with me. Just because, you you would say like, well, I don't really want to follow them. I go to school with them. I know who these people are. I don't want to follow them. Like you have no reason to follow them. Or I could think of another retail store situation where we got in a line of product, like mugs and cups that had feathers printed on them. And my boss said, oh, these are cute. This is the Pocahontas collection. And I was just like, what is that supposed to mean? And she's just like, you know, like it's got like feathers and they're purple and it's like Pocahontas. And I'm like, what? Like just anything with a feather on it? Like it has to be indigenous? Like, come on. Right. And she didn't see the problem with that. And then like everybody was just like being like to me like I was being sensitive or something. So like, I mean, there's just that attitude when you're at work that you have to like just be a part of the team and be like a cohesive collective person. Like you're not allowed to have your own feelings or like your own perceptions on things. And I've always found that extremely problematic.
Mm-hmm.
I find the retail situations are always the most sticky the stickiest ones to be in. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's not always coming from coworkers or management too. Sometimes it could be just a random customer, like you said. This one time I worked in a retail establishment, and I remember there was this little old lady, and she goes, you know, I usually ask for students to rent my basement to. And she goes, I've done so much for all of these students. They're all international. And then she goes on to say, like, she uses the term Negro and Paki when referring to them. And she goes, one time she referred to them as this, and she was like, I provide food for them and shelter, and I treat them so well. And they got really offended. And so she approached me in the store randomly. And she goes, and I'm guessing she wanted validation. She just seen the color of my skin, and she's like, oh, maybe that person would understand. And she goes, do you find that offensive? You know, like I do so much for them, and I don't understand why they're so unappreciative, and they're so, I guess, a little bit hostile towards me when I refer to them as that. And she's like, I don't know what else to call them. And I was just kind of flabbergasted. I didn't know what to say in that moment. And I paused for a second, and then I go, well, you know, like I would be really offended if you use that term, and like I'm renting from you. I'm paying you to be here. I'm not asking for care and all of these things so that you can refer to me as to whatever you want. And then I did talk to another coworker about it because, you know, she kept following me around the store with more and more stories. And I go, you know, I don't really want to deal with this right now. It was really awkward. And, but it kind of put me in a sort of a compromising situation because I didn't want management to feel that as if I was trying to avoid this particular customer, or I was offended, but at the same time, I still had to complete my job, and there was really no empathy coming from them, right? They just see it as a lost sale no matter what. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what exactly those situations, like what's the best way to handle them. I find though that maybe it's always best if you can include somebody else in the conversation, because the last thing that you want is something that you said or the way that you've reacted. Somebody thinks that you're overreacted or you weren't justified to react in that way. And I've learned that in a few other workplaces as well. I found myself in another situation at a corporate company, and basically I was told to sit in the corner and nobody needed to hear from me. By one of my managers who showed up late to a meeting. And so her manager just kind of asked me like, hey, while we're waiting, you were working on this project. Do you mind just kind of taking over and getting the meeting started while we're waiting for her? And she came in and she goes, why are you sitting in the middle of the room? Like nobody asked you to be there. You can sit in the corner and take your notes like you're supposed to be, but basically get off the screen is what she was saying. And I was just appalled. And in that situation, like, other than the other manager that was there, he kind of said nothing and he just went quiet. I didn't have anybody else to witness that situation. So when I did decide to finally like file a report and say, okay, maybe I want to get this dealt with, like I felt really unsafe and really kind of, well, I'm not sure what it was that really got her, whether she was kind of like power tripping or just like, oh, this young person and their color, they shouldn't be doing my job because I've been here for 20 years. That's the kind of feeling I got from it. But the lesson that was learned was what she did was I scheduled an HR meeting, and she actually showed up to the HR meeting. And she goes, I'm not going to allow you to file a report against me. And at that point in time, I realized, wow, I don't have any other witnesses other than her manager. And he would have spoken up if, you know what I mean, if he felt, I guess, empowered to do so, or if he felt that she was kind of behaving inappropriately. I have no idea, but I do find that would be my number one advice if you ever feel unsafe or threatened or discriminated against. If you have somebody there to witness it, or even right after, if you can go and speak to somebody and have them document word for word what happens, sometimes that can help sort of mediate the situation in the end. So,
good advice. I just wanted to mention or kind of throw the ball towards Becky. I thought that you might have had a point just before we got into the retail horrors. I have a retail horror story of my own, but I don't want to get into it. Or maybe I will if we have time.
I think, Janette, like one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking is just, you know, you didn't mention the color of skin that the other manager had in the room, but I think that's kind of one of the things that I've really been thinking about is a lot of the times, and this is a completely different situation, but a lot of the times I'm, you know, the only person in the room speaking up, and I worry about as the Sioux becomes more diverse as it should, that there won't be enough people in the room and there won't be enough witnesses to make sure that, I mean, first of all, it shouldn't have to be where, you know, it shouldn't be like, oh, can you have my back retroactively? Like, it would be nice if in the moment that person who had, I assume, more power than you did, maybe, you know, spoke up in the moment. And of course, that leads to you also kind of made me think about how it does lead to two different issues in my mind about like power disparities. Like, I'm always aware, I'm white, and I'm always aware of that power disparity and what that means when I'm in a room and when I hear things like that, and how I should be using my voice. But it also makes me really aware of like who else is in the room. Is it my boss? Is it someone who's going to have a lot of control over my career? And you know, there's that weighted decision of like, okay, did anybody hear this? You know, is this something that I speak up for because it's practically injured somebody because it's morally wrong? Like, I do, so I don't know what the manager's situation was, but that was kind of something that came to mind. Like, what was his calculus there? And in the end, his silence, you know, contributed, I think, maybe even more to your harm than the original commenter. So what I was going to say, it wasn't retail related. Mine is more, I won't be specific about which jobs or whether it was at law school, but generally I'm talking about the legal profession. So whether it was law students or lawyers that I met along the way, because I'm white, I've seen and heard some like pretty horrifically racist things. You know, my way of dealing with it, it's difficult in the workplace. It's difficult in a professional setting because you know, I always say something, but it feels like I'm not accomplishing anything a lot of the times because I'm the only person saying it. It's usually in a group setting. If it's one-on-one, then I find the conversations go much differently. You know, I'm able to have a conversation about like, hey, have you read up on our history? Do you understand what that means? Do you understand the contemporary situation? You know, we can kind of engage in a little bit more of a humane discussion. But, you know, when you're one person in a group, you know, it's a little bit more difficult to fight like the mob mentality. And I find white fragility. So one of the things I find really interesting is like people distancing themselves from whiteness while we're clearly benefiting from it. So I can't be racist because I'm Italian or I'm Polish or I'm Ukrainian and my ancestors went through X, Y, and Z. And so I have somehow no responsibility for the system that we live in. And I can say that from my perspective, like, I find them truly disappointing when I hear them in the legal profession, because you have to ignore history, you have to ignore facts, you have to ignore reason, and you have to ignore the friggin' human rights code in order to get to that place. And it's completely, it's completely opposite to our obligations as lawyers. Like I don't see how this view in the workplace that everybody's entitled to their own opinion, I feel that that's got to go. I feel that that's got to go. There's a mistake that's made, and an illogical error that's made, where we assume that like freedom, right to speech, and all of these things needs to trump safety of people in the workplace, and really the interpretation of the law. So sorry about that rant, but I just wanted to say, like, some of the things you said, Janette, really like when you were talking really hit me. And that was all I was going to say as well when I was going to jump in there.
It's a really good point. It's the way that you had kind of put, that lawyers are supposed to be upholding these values of like knowing their history, knowing human rights, and knowing all of these things that are supposed to put them in the place that they're at to work the best way they can, and to hear that so much of that is being thrown away when it comes to race relations and understanding their position in it all and how they benefit from it. It's like, what can be done about that? What can be done about that?
And it's great to educate, but then you also have to like protect yourself too, right? So one time at Walmart, I wore rubber boots because it was raining, and I didn't have a car yet. I do now. But rubber boots because it was raining, and a hoodie sweater, and I was in university, and I was getting some candy and a portable speaker. It was during exams, so I was like, I'm gonna stay up on my candy and get this speaker so I can listen to music while I do my work. And I get followed all around Walmart. I get my candy and my portable speaker. I ring through the cash. I pay for everything. I put it in my pack sack. Oh yes, I had a pack sack because I'm a student, and I don't drive. So I put it in my pack sack at the cash after paying, and I get asked to open my bag at the entrance of Walmart. It's a procedure. Okay, yeah, I get that, but why? They weren't checking everyone's receipt on the way out, but suddenly they needed to check my receipt. I don't know if it was because of my race, like I'm fairly white passing, but then, I can be kind of brown looking too. It just depends on the day. And I'm wearing rubber boots and the hoodie and the pack sack. So like, I definitely feel profiled, and I'm educated. So I'm, about, racial profiling, or even just, class profiling. So I'm feeling it, and I'm overwhelmed, and I'm in school. They made me check through my bag on like 3 multiple occasions. Like they kept, like while I was there, I opened the first thing and they're like, oh, well, that's not good enough. I want you to look in the next one, and I want you to look in the next one, all 3 pockets. Now, I worked at the mall during that time, so I know they don't have a right to rifle through my bag, but I'm trying to show them that, like, I'm not stealing from them. You are wrong. So they continued to make me go through my bag on like 3 different asks. So I'm hysterical at this point. I zip up my bag, I leave, I'm crying. People in the mall know me. They're like, oh, Cece, what's wrong? Come into my store, give me a hug. It's gonna be okay. And then I'm working in the mall at that time. So my current boss at that time was like, Cece, I think that you overreacted in that situation. I said, oh, why? So-and-so. And they're like, oh, because you're not even Native. You're not even brown. So your dad has blonde hair and blue eyes, because he had been to my store because I worked in the mall. So my boss at the time working retail was casting her version of my identity on me. And saying that I didn't have a right to be upset for being profiled in, the same mall that I work in the community, in the economy that I'm helping support. So, needless to say, I don't work there anymore, and I don't talk to that person anymore. That particular boss and I were quite close. She used to actually let me drive her car sometimes. Like, I thought she was really nice. But she didn't understand, or for whatever reason wasn't able to reconcile, because I made a scene and I was not, brown enough. I was white to her. So sometimes you need to just block those people and rid them in your lives. Like, sometimes you can't educate, and you can't burn yourself out educating, whether you're like, whatever shade of the rainbow you want to be, or feel, identifying with. Sometimes you have to just protect your spirit and energy. But I mean, sometimes it's worth a good dose of education too, especially if it's someone you love. Has anybody had that, like, experiences with, like, people, either close coworkers or people close to them that you really care about, that are, walking that edge of racism?
Yeah. At my current job, actually, I do have people that lots of different offices that I work for, and people that I'm close working with, that I care about. But then, that the conversation, it comes up, and I'm thinking to myself, it's like, okay, well, what can I do to educate? What can I do to kind of maybe welcome into, a different mindset, or, at least set a boundary, like, hey, this is not okay to say around me, or really it's not okay to say anywhere, but I want you to at least know that, within what power I have, it's not okay to say around me, right? I mean, I would wonder, how long did you, so after that incident happened at the mall, how much longer did you have that job for?
A couple of weeks, and I just, like, gave up some of my shifts and ended up, like, moving into another role. It was just, like, at the end of my time in university too, so I was, like, getting into like, jobs that were in my field, so I was lucky, I guess, in that way. If I couldn't have exited that situation, like, if I was still working in the mall and didn't get a job in my field, I imagine I would have switched stores, right? Like, yeah. I mean, I guess if I made too big of a scene, I wonder if anybody would want to hire me. I don't know. Once I switched stores, because I used to jump around in the mall a lot. But yeah, I guess I'm not sure what would happen if I try to go back and work there. I did make, like, a video and kind of blast about it. So maybe I'd get some shade. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. And that's, like, one of the things too. It's like, when you're working a position and like, that job is supporting you, and it's keeping the roof over your head and the lights on, it's like you do kind of have a line to walk. You kind of have to make sure you're standing up for what you believe is right, but at the same time you're not leaving yourself homeless and destitute, I mean, because it could just be like enough of those incidents, somebody just checks off a box on something, and, oh, you know what, you're out the door, we got somebody else that's younger that's going to replace you, and it's like, oh my God, like, what do you do? What do you do?
Do you get that, Janet, like, as an activist and as a professional? Like, do you get that push-pull of, like, I want to say something, but I don't want to ruin it?
Absolutely. And all the time. So that HR situation that I shared with you guys is exactly that. And I think, like, working or living in a small town, nepotism is so rampant here, and it's actually exhausting. Like, in your case, if security isn't the ones to protect you, or if you can't go to HR, it's like, okay, who do you go to? And these companies don't have any sort of, like, diversity and inclusion policies, or they don't have third parties that would do maybe an internal investigation of these individual functions. So it leaves you at a loss. And absolutely, the same HR situation, it was exactly that, where it was like, where else do I turn? Who investigates the HR department? And what does that mean for me? Like, I could never probably work in that field again. Of course, I was forced to resign, because how could I work in a toxic environment moving forward? It just wasn't going to happen. And that was a case where I tried to consider all my options. It was like, well, do I speak to an external lawyer? Do I speak to the union that's running the company? I tried to look for resources, and they all kind of said the same thing. Well, this person has been here for a really long time. They're senior. If we try to investigate this any further, they're likely just going to say, oh, this was all due to performance issues. And so it gets really hard to prove, and it's really sticky. So, like, we see this all the time. Like, I remember there was a project that we were working on at Algoma about a year or two ago, where it was like, if something happens to a student at large, where do they go to maybe file a complaint? How is that going to be handled? Is it confidential? Is it safe? So So what are they doing about that? And so we actually had to develop a committee just to sort of evaluate all of those little internal processes and come up with ways that we could create like a safe space or a safe avenue that if somebody felt discriminated against in the workplace, or maybe it was harassment or violence even, that they have an avenue to go and report that, and then there's confidence that hopefully it's going to be investigated and resolved appropriately. But how many of those cases actually turn out, and not just like at the university, but in any setting, like how many do those cases kind of turn out favorable for the victim that's happening to, right? And I don't really have an answer, because I feel like everywhere that I've worked, that has always been sort of like something that was lacking. And there is no real place to turn when something like that happens. I think that there is a very specific timeline. I don't know how forgiving that they are. So you can file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission of Ontario if you wanted to, but I believe that you only have like, I want to say it's an 8-month window to do so. So that also kind of puts a lot of pressure on the victim. And sometimes, like, in order to protect yourself, you may not want to go and do that right away. So it all comes down to like not only like organizational policies, but I think like definitely on the provincial and federal level, there's just not enough laws and avenues in place to kind of protect the worker when stuff like this happens.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I practice in employment law and human rights issues in the employment context. And, you know, one of the areas that I'm hoping to one day get into is a more proactive approach to help connect employers with resources so they understand what their obligations are. Because, you know, Janette, like what you've described is like a lack of policies and a lack of training. Like and so basically under the, you know, there's different pieces of legislation that requires employers with, you know, more than 5 employees to have posted where everybody can see what happens when this happens. What happens if you're harassed? What happens if you're sexually harassed? What happens if you experience racism? Who was it by? Well, then it'll go here. Should it get, you know, this is the conditions under which a third party investigator will be retained. And if they don't have that, then, you know, already they're breaching their obligations and making the job more difficult. And then, like you said, we're in this small town. So even if you do go and you go to the Human Rights Tribunal and you're successful, and say you even get that remedy where they put you back in your job, how much do you want to be in that flipping job? You know, when you know they're not going to educate themselves, they're going to take it as a slap on the wrist. They're probably going to, in some way, push you out and make you feel uncomfortable and welcome. Like, if I would love to work for an employer that, you know, recognized this is, thank you for calling us out. We need to do a system overhaul. And there are a few of them, but obviously that's like few and far between. So I think you have like a very good point to say the legislation is reactionary, like not to expand too much or get too out there here, but I mean, I just think about who is running the businesses, right? What is their education? When, if they ever did, when did they learn about residential schools? When did they learn about slavery in Canada? Did they ever, you know? And like, what's their context for, what do they understand about what it means to be a woman in a workplace? Are any of them women? Are any of them, you know, it's a huge, I think, burden that an employer has. And I feel as though it very rarely gets discharged. And I think when you're in a small town as an employee, you really have to, a lot of people really have to pick their battles, because even if they're right, they might not get vindication, because what if there's no person in the room, like you said? Like, what if there's no person to back them up? How are they going to prove that feeling that I think most of us have experienced, where it's like, and for me, not with racism, but that feeling that you experience where you know from tone, you know it's wrong, and then you write it down on paper and it really doesn't seem that bad, and it's like this weird kind of systemic like gaslighting that goes on, and you got to fight all of that maybe on your own. Like, it's a tricky, it's a tough system for people who experience harassment, and particularly covert, experience like covert systemic racism or sexism or any of the isms, really.
I just want to add to that too. I feel like when you're not from a country and if you're coming into a country and you're an immigrant and you're sort of adapting to the local sort of, I guess, cultural aspects and what's acceptable and what's not, there's a lot of confusion, I think, for newcomers too, as to what should be tolerated in the workplace. What are those microaggressions that are not okay? And I think if you're not from here, it takes a while before it'll actually hit home. Like for me, before working at Algoma, I think Algoma University has done a very good job with sort of educating their students, their workers, all of that stuff on basically racism on a spectrum or discrimination on a spectrum. You don't hear it, it's not spoken about very often in any other workplaces. So for me, it was like I was almost like 6 years into my career before I was able to reflect and realize that, hey, like these incidences have happened and this was the outcome in the end. And well, I was discriminated against. Like it didn't resonate until much after the fact. And there is a lot of regret with that. But I think that also, there's a big portion of that sort of should be taking responsibility for what happens in a workplace. When you go in there, maybe they're sort of educating you on the basics of what workplace harassment and violence, those forms that it might come in. And it's very basic. It's provided by the Ontario Ministry of Labor, I believe, is the main one that a lot of them follow. Very few workplaces will actually go into depth with what the different forms are or the way that you should respond. And I find that a lot of the bigger corporate brands are a little bit better with sort of that education, especially if there's a retail aspect involved, because they don't want to lose those sales with their customer base. But when you're dealing with like just an office environment and you're just kind of working internally with coworkers and managers and such, it's not, they don't educate you to that level. So even though you might be discriminated against, it's really hard to pinpoint if you weren't actually educated in that field or if you weren't immersed in that environment. And so like working at the student union, that was a big eye opener for me because it's literally all we do now. And we have some pretty big partners that make sure that every aspect would be covered that discrimination or racism might present itself. So I'm thinking that might be a portion of it, like what are the repercussions or how can we resolve this when it happens? But like, what does that also look like when it's happening, like in the moment is a big question, right? So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
And also, how can we good? Also good. No, it's okay. We got excited because it was so good.
It was so good.
Just how can we model those good examples when there's organizations or workplaces that are doing good? How can we like open it up and break down the stigmas about talking about sharing those policies and best practices so that we can find what works for our small town community and get people actually like on a healthy page as far as like racism and healing from, our town's, I guess, collective racism. Mic drop.
I think too, like, it's just such a good point that you made. And I think one thing I would just top of that too is we have to stop trying to find bright lines in the sand. Like the number of times people ask me, so like, what can't I do and what can't I say? And it's like, geez, man, like, it's not that easy of a question. You have to really examine power dynamics and it's such a nuanced conversation. It's ongoing. And, this idea of like, you're only doing something to avoid punishment or being caught as opposed to really, engaging in these important conversations. And I guess that's kind of what I was trying to get at too, is like, that's the job of an employer, is to have those like deep conversations. And I think that's why it kind of comes together, why I think this like idea of professionalism is just like a little bit of a myth and a barrier. And it's like, let's not have those discussions. One, it interferes with productivity, apparently. too. I don't think that most people who own property and businesses, particularly in our town, not to overgeneralize too much, but I'd be surprised if people were prepared to train their employees on conversations that are that deep and complex, and not just like, don't do this. It's like, here's the questions you ask yourself, here's how to educate yourself, here's how to really engage in the issues, respect people, make this a safe workplace. Like, that is an ongoing conversation that doesn't just happen in like a 1 hour module that we get online. You know, it's a deep commitment, I think, that has to be made. And I think when it's broken by an employee, like, I think that's a stand that an employer has to take right from the get-go. And I think that there has to be strong enforceable policies that when that contract is broken, like, that is not something that necessarily is punitive, but then you have this like mechanism in place where, you know, you can really have like, you're qualified, or you know people are qualified to engage in a deeper discussion, you know, and then it's not about avoiding punishment and avoiding, you know, then there is, you know, maybe we can decrease the whole, you know, making a villain out of someone who's come forward with something very serious, because the conversation's changed, the way we deal with it has changed. So sorry to go on a tangent, but well said, Janette and Cece.
How are we doing for time here, Seith? Is there any
okay.
final?
I'd say we got maybe about 10 minutes left. We could wrap it up. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure we were doing good and leaving space for closing remarks, because it's so juicy this time around. Another thing that we had mentioned and that you kind of touched on too, Becky, so it was kind of natural, is just that myth of professionalism. And the idea that if you speak up, then you're not professional, or that you've lost your composure, but really you're just correcting like an injustice, right? How are you folks feeling about that statement?
I feel like it kind of comes back to what you said earlier when you confronted your boss. There's this idea that you have to be performative in a certain way. And I mean, to be honest, emotion in the workplace is often seen as a negative rather than a positive, when it really should be a positive, because I found that more empathetic and more personal workspaces were the more healthier workspaces. I'm very fortunate now to be in a very healthy workspace where like they encourage women. They encourage specifically Black and Indigenous women to become historians. New immigrants to get their master's degrees, like they're paying for those initiatives and things like that. But it's all started based on conversations and feedback and a lot of anonymous like quizzes and things like that. So people didn't feel outed or targeted by other people within the workspace. They could just kind of like say what they needed to say. So I feel as though sometimes when we get into, you know, saying how we feel or confronting something, we always run that risk of not appearing professional, but like sometimes we have to unpack what the professional standard is and like who it's really meant for. And if it's not really meant for us, then like, why are we trying to adhere to it? So that was just kind of like what I was thinking about during that.
I personally feel like, I feel like my office still has a long way to go in order to kind of reach the goals that we should be reaching as far as a small business goes, and just reaching out to those resources and trying to get the education to happen, and like calling everybody in, to kind of do that. I definitely feel like there's a lot of we benefit a lot from some of the institutionalized racism and stuff that happens in the industry that we work in, just the whole idea of like, I'd rather speak to somebody North American than East Indian, or these people don't know much about IT because they are in this realm or whatever, and they don't really know how the whole system works. And it's like, well, no, that whole system, that system is not, like a computer is just zeros and ones. It's not, certain people can't figure out computers, others can. It's like, no, that's not true, and so we do have a long ways to go, I think, to properly recognize that and to be operating in that field. And I think what I'm going to do is, after this conversation, is get in touch with my HR representative and have a conversation with her about what we can do going forward to kind of bring that up a little bit more, because it's definitely been something that's been on my mind for a long time. But as Janette kind of said too, it's like, sometimes it takes years before you finally realize, wait a sec, all this is actually happening, like when you're in the thick of it and you're just worried about what your next check is going to be and like, making sure that the house is going and the lights are on and all that kind of stuff. You miss a lot, so yeah, that's my thoughts.
I've Storm, like everything you said, like that really, I felt summed it up really well. One thing that I was thinking about when you were talking is, so right now the boss I have is very receptive. Like since the day I started here, even in my interview, I was honest about what I wanted. And that was a workplace that was committed to diversity and lifting up voices. And, I've always said what it was that I wanted. And from day one, I've received that support from him, which has been great. But I also was thinking about how I've had bosses in the past, or I still know people that kind of goes back to your question, Cece, about like, I think sometimes like you develop love for the people in your workplace. I often do. I might not like everybody, but I think I see them more than I see my family because I work long hours and, I've grown to love them. And it is hard sometimes to have those conversations, like sometimes that, not quite sure how to put it, but sometimes that can make things more difficult too. I think that those two things are true at the same time, which is that, you love somebody and they're also doing something that you hate, which is, being racist. So I find that I think Storm just said it. She summed up everything. Like you summed up everything. So I don't have too much to add, but that one little thing kind of is like another piece of the puzzle for me that I struggle with sometimes.
Yeah, I'd like to just add to, I don't think professionalism should be a term or an expectation or even a standard used to sort of fit people into a box. And I think that in today's sort of work culture, that term is kind of used a lot to say, we expect you to look this certain way, we expect you to embrace this culture, or here comes like the micromanagers that won't even give you the freedom to do anything outside of what you were assigned. I think in the end, it is very oppressing and it's less productive because now those individuals have to consciously be spending time and energy on how to fit in. And that's not, it's just like very detrimental to somebody's mental health to have to think about that all of the time, rather than actually focusing on tasks, focusing on ways that they can sort of develop themselves and improve in that sense. So like I've worked in places where it's like, oh, if you wear jeans and it's not on a certain day of the week, I think it was Thursdays at that particular place, then you're a little bit eccentric. You're not sort of fitting into the norms. Or like, this is my hair, I can't really do anything with this. And I've actually had one boss one time that told me that, hey, like I looked really unkept just by putting my hair out like this. And yeah, what do you say in those situations? And I remember one time, I think this was kind of like on my last straw at the workplace. And she kind of brought up basically an outfit that I was wearing and maybe I should do this and that and the next, basically to sort of conform a little bit better to the work culture in that environment. And that was a time that I don't want to say I snapped, but I went off and I broke down and I was like, I think that you're being really unfair and you're not allowing me to basically flourish in this environment because I'm constantly focused on the way I look or the way that I'm appearing or even I want to say not my work ethic, but more so the flow of that work and how much I can actually, what my output is like, like that all takes a toll. And in the end, it's like, that's not productive and that's not the environment that I need to be successful in my profession. So I really hope that more workplaces are a little bit more mindful when they do set these standards. And I think that they just need to be a little bit more tolerant as to other people's cultural background and those sort of, I guess, the workflows or work ethics that they're used to. They can sort of kind of work with them with it, not so sort of stuck a person in a box and then expect them to sort of either sink or swim.
I guess to bring it in, since it was the Racism 101, if you could say one thing to your white or white identifying coworker who experiences racism, or if you are, okay, let me rephrase this. If you're a white person at work and your white friend is being racist, what should you say to them? If you could say one thing.
I would say, why did you say that? Just why did you say that, you know? Not you shouldn't say that, but why did you say that? Make them think about it. I think that was definitely something I learned from Mark when he was on the show. He kind of like put it very eloquently when he kind of just said, you know, why did you say that? Right? And then let them answer as best they can, and then maybe just that'll be the start of a good dialogue, hopefully.
I agree with that. I usually tend to ask them, can you expand? Because it just sort of gives them a little bit more room to think about it and hopefully correct their actions if they feel the need to. But I also think that it sort of gets that dialogue going, and it also it makes them vulnerable, because if there's other people around, now you're asking them to repeat the situation. And so I really hope that whatever was said, that they can actually stand by it, or they're going to retract and apologize and hopefully learn to do a little bit better in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell them to say something. Just in general, they're like, stand up for other people, because a lot of times I see complacency, and when I say something, people are usually shocked because they expect complacency. And I just think, don't be complacent.
I think my reaction when I guess you catch me on a good day, is asking questions, and which is probably the best response. And I'm not gonna lie, when I'm in a group setting, sometimes, and I don't recommend, but sometimes my response is making fun of them a little bit, which shame is probably not the best tool for teaching. But I think if I, was on a good day, ideal response, it's usually to ask them, what do you mean by that? But I think I'm now going to steal the can you expand, because well said. Just very eloquent.
Mm-hmm. I like that too, because and this kind of piggybacks on what we were talking about last show too, but it makes folks too, if they are being racist, either recognize it, but in an covert way, like, or if they're being covert about it, it makes them have to be like overt about it and in your face about it if that's truly the stance they want to take, or they're going to like correct themselves and learn. So it can be like a point to change a behavior, or it could be a point to at least hit a behavior on the head. Right? I would much rather someone be overt and have to kind of own that and be transparent and not being who they are, than like covertly getting away with it and feeling like they're acting of, sound moral. So that's my thoughts. How are we doing here, Seith?
I think we're good to go here. Ready to close it up?
Any super final thoughts though? Because I don't want to cut any voices off. Mm-hmm. Your voices are so important. I'm so grateful. Janette, Becky, Skylee-Storm, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you for all of your offerings and your lived experiences and your spirits. Now I'll throw the ball to Seith.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody at the Voices for Change panel today. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And I'm just going to get this switched over here. And we will be back in 2 weeks' time for another episode of the CC Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. And got one last thing I got to do here. Let's go like that. Okay. All right. Peace. We will see you guys in 2 weeks. And be sure to subscribe at facebook.com/ccandseith. We are also on twitch.tv/ccandseith. Those where the shows go live. You can actually chat in real time, too, if you log on to Twitch while the show is airing. And you can watch past episodes on YouTube by searching for CC and Seith. It's CCANDSEITH. Thank you very much.
My third eye seen it coming from a mile away, trying to save the day, trying to pave the way to a new life. Choose to do right through the moonlight, glowing on my skin. No one in the woods, hear the sound of leaves blowing in the wind. Hymnal open, but not knowing to begin. Finally sing a song to the pollywogs in the pond, made of polygons lost in the fog. Then I heard a voice, it was probably God. It was kind of odd, telling me his thoughts. Then I thought, what kind of God gets lost and just talks to a man who gets lost like just stop.
And when you find yourself thinking about the day when your time will come, it should make you enjoy each and every moment that we're granted in reality. And when your thoughts are drifting, soaring and flying and climbing higher, take a deep breath and listen to that internal spiritual guide.
Talking in the back row with the symphony. She almost convinced me that I was sickly, cause I had sympathy for Ted Kaczynski. I tried to put her down like burning my hands, or perfect commands like get lost. Can we just talk? Thanks a lot, God. Like just stop.
And when you find yourself thinking about the day when your time will come, it should make you enjoy each and every moment that we're granted in reality. And when your thoughts are drifting, soaring and flying and climbing higher, take a deep breath and listen to that internal spiritual guide.
Peace, y'all. Okay, you guys can
Podcast. I like this part because it's a little bit informal. Sometimes I turn my camera off and multitask, and I